All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanan, and in this video, we're going to talk about what about Floyd Mayweather Jr., Errol Spence, and what Jeff Mayweather had to say, attempting to debunk a long-kept rumor about the two. Let's talk about that in this video. This video is brought to you by Boxing Showtimes, a new professional boxing schedule in your pocket. It helps you to keep updated on boxing events and details. Also assists you when you want to find bars near you to watch fights and allows you to set reminders for upcoming fights. Download the Boxing Showtimes for your smartphone and your tablet. Thank you again to our new sponsors, Boxing Showtimes. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanan. In this video, we're going to talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Errol Spence Jr. And what Jeff Mayweather had to say about the two of those guys sparring. Now, before I get into that, though, let me welcome you back to the channel. Thank you so much to everybody that subscribes to the channel and supports the channel. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please accept my invitation to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more videos. And thank you guys for checking out the video today. All right, so let's get into this, man. I like this dude. There was a live stream that took place on Fight Hype. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Fight Hype. If you're not familiar with Fight Hype, definitely go check out Fight Hype. They do a lot of really good work. They do videos with fighters on a regular basis, right? And Jeff Mayweather is associated with, excuse me, it was not on Fight Hype. It was on the Mayweather Boxing Channel. Forgive me. Yeah, it was on the Mayweather Boxing Channel. And so the Mayweather Boxing Channel had a portion called Ask Jeff Anything. So one of the questions that were asked of Jeff Mayweather was, tell us about the sparring between Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. Now, I mean, and Floyd Mayweather Jr. Terence Crawford and Floyd Mayweather Jr. Forgive me, I'm doing this video at like 6 o'clock in the morning. All right, so I love the conversation because one of the first times that I had ever heard of Errol Spence Jr. was in connection with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Adrian Bronner, right? So the first time I heard about Errol Spence Jr., I'm sure you guys heard this, was that Errol Spence Jr. sparred Adrian Bronner and beat Adrian Bronner so bad. And he was sparring with him, I do believe, ahead of the Marcus Maidana fight. And this was during the time where Adrian Bronner was undefeated, right? Everybody's the best, one of the best dudes in the world. He's the next Mayweather and all that. And Errol Spence Jr. got in the ring with him and beat him so bad he made him cry. So he came in there with absolutely no no pause on him at all, right? And when he was sparring with him, went in there to make a name for himself against Adrian Bronner and made that statement really, really big, right? So fast forward, and I do believe that Floyd Mayweather Jr., and I'm giving you the story beforehand in case you hadn't heard it, that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was getting ready for Marcus Maidana himself, and Errol Spence Jr. was still unknown. So Kenny Porter, who is the father of Sean Porter, was asked if he had any sparring partners, if he knew anybody to spar Floyd Mayweather. So he said, yeah, I got a guy. So he brought in Errol Spence Jr. into the ring with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and they sparred. And the story was that Errol Spence Jr. was giving him all kind of work, beating him up, right? Gave him a black. I think he was the guy that gave Floyd Mayweather Jr. a black eye. And by the way, the black eye was seen. All right. So I'm going to get into what Jeff Mayweather had to say. But just so you know, somebody gave Floyd Mayweather Jr. a black eye back in the day. So and then Floyd Mayweather Jr. wanted to stop the sparring. The story was he wanted to stop the sparring and get out. And Errol was like, and wanted to throw Errol out of the gym. And Errol was like, no, I ain't going anywhere, get back in the ring, right? And then they went back at it, right? So the whole story is, one of the reasons why Errol Spence Jr.'s fan base blew up early in his career was because of those legendary sparring sessions between himself, Adrian Bronner, and Floyd Mayweather Jr., right? So Roger Mayweather was asked about it, and Roger Mayweather's like, man, that is a myth. That is not true. First of all, what happened was, what happened was Floyd Mayweather Jr. had already sparred 3 or 4 rounds and before Errol got in there, so Floyd was already tired, and then so when Errol got in there, he got in there against a dude that was already tired. Floyd was like, all right, that's enough sparring, I'm good. And then Errol refused to leave. But other than that, nothing to the story. He didn't get dominated, didn't get beat up, all of that stuff, right? But the guy said, and then the guy that was interviewing him said, yeah, and plus, I've never really heard of, Floyd Mayweather Jr. really beating up sparring partners. And, you don't really always have the greatest showing against sparring partners. That's not how Floyd always works. Floyd was working on things. I was like, I don't know about that. I think I recall around that point in time, Floyd having shows, on that 24 Access for his fights about how he was beating the tar out of out of sparring partners, man. And so I don't know, man. I don't think I necessarily buy that. I've also spoken with people that were close to the camp, and people that were close to the camp at the time, even though they have a benefit, they definitely have their own. It's in their benefit to say Errol Spence Jr., because they're closer to his team. We're like, no. Errol Spence went in there and he was going to make a name against him and gave Floyd a nice little beating. And said, now there were times when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was Floyd Mayweather Jr. didn't just get completely, out. He didn't get knocked out and beat around, all that. However, he was under constant pressure and constant work and taking a lot of shots from Errol Spence Jr. And Errol proved that, he belonged in that ring with Errol and all of that good stuff, right? So it's all interesting to me, man. But, things like this, you can really only take with a grain of salt because, first of all, it is just sparring, right? And preparing for a fight, even though I don't know, from everybody telling me, I think when a young dude like that goes at you, that Floyd ain't just going to sit there and let him beat up on him just because he happens to be working on something. He's probably going to put the brakes on that, put that brakes on it a little bit and try to show the young dude, what he's got, right? Similar to like stories about Muhammad Ali and Larry Holmes, and how Larry Holmes was getting the best of Floyd Mayweather, getting the best of Ali in sparring matches. But then one day Ali heard Larry Holmes talking too much and said, okay. And then he wound up beating up Larry Holmes so bad that Larry Holmes went home crying, right? And said, yeah, I thought you were supposed to be the champion, right? Those type of things do happen. However, I don't think that diminishes Floyd Mayweather Jr. as a fighter at all. It doesn't say what would happen if the two of those guys got in a ring with each other over 12 rounds, right? With 10-ounce gloves, not the big sparring gloves, all right? And one guy actually had months and months to prepare for the other, right? So if Floyd knew what Errol liked to do before he got in the ring and then being prepared for it, that would say a lot of different things about who would actually win the fight. But as far as Jeff Mayweather goes, it's a myth, never happened, right? Exaggeration. But then again, what is he supposed to say is his uncle? But anyway, I thought that was an interesting story. Always wanted to hear Jeff Mayweather's stance on that. You let me know what you think in the comments section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.